All right, welcome back to the Tim Teaches podcast. I'm your host, Tim McCoy. Today I'm thrilled to be joined by Timothy Lewis, another Tim. Tim is a certified mindfulness coach and educator, avid researcher. Tim combines his knowledge of epigenetics, human psychology, and trauma sensitive practices to help his clients. He's a yoga instructor and practices Brazilian martial arts. And I was going to try to pronounce the real word of what you do, but I need your help on that if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, it's capoeira.
Okay. I even looked it up and it tried to pronounce it, and I was like, man, I'm gonna butcher this, so I'll just let you say it. So right on. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me. Happy holidays to you as well.
So you're a certified mindfulness coach. What does that really entail for somebody who's never actually heard of it? I've just touched on it a little bit in my life, so I'd love to kind of hear about that.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because one of the first things that I like to do is actually see how people relate to the word
Mhm.
itself first. So, mindfulness, a lot of times, people may think of it as a certain sitting position or a certain speed at which something is done. So, I like to kind of get a gauge for one's understanding of mindfulness. And then that's important because what it actually is, especially in the context of what I do, the best way that I describe it is that I'm an educator. And if one asks of what, it's usually the things that they don't necessarily teach us in school. And so when it comes to mindfulness, for me, mindfulness is really about presence. It's about being present with the life that's in front of us and using it as a way to practice greater self-awareness. And so we can bring greater versions of ourselves to the lives that we live. So to be a better father, a better brother, a better employee, a better all the things.
How did have you always practiced this, or how'd you get into mindfulness?
Yeah. Formally, my formal training started with exposure to John Kabat-Zinn. That was probably the first time that I actually heard the word mindfulness because I'm originally from Flint, Michigan. And so many of the things, again, when I was saying earlier about, whether it's a particular seated position or a set of practices, many times those were things that I didn't learn growing up. However, when I look back, in retrospect, like I said, I was introduced to some of the work of John Kabat-Zinn around 2015, 2016. When I look back, I see where there was always a connection to nature. There was always a certain connection to these practices of introspection. I've been journaling since I was a little boy. That was a really critical part of my development as a kid. I like to think that some of these practices have always been with me, and the word mindfulness kind of caught up around 2015 or 2016.
Were you kind of raised this way? Did you get this from your parents, or were they mindfulness type people, or how does I mean you're growing up this way, and I know like my brother, he was reading, Zen books and all kinds of stuff early on in our childhood as well, and I was like, I don't know where this stuff came from. It's just, are you just born with it?
Well, I think it was certainly cultivated,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things that I like to think of as a tool of mindfulness in and of itself is curiosity. Like this practice of curiosity and a willingness and also the ability to follow one's curiosity. So that was always nurtured. I was always outside. I was always collecting things and probably bringing them into the house at some point. In fact, my parents actually bought me for Christmas a number of different stones.
Nice.
So these are things that I actually collected as a kid, but when
Yeah.
I was a kid, they were just called rocks. I didn't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
any, I didn't know anything about, any metaphysical, anything. So my dad would take me to the rock store,
Yeah.
and I mean, I could spend hours there. And so, yeah, it was cultivated in a lot of ways, but again, without some of the labels and the specific names of things.
You were just doing it. You didn't really know why or what you were doing, but you were zenning out early.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm just starting to get into my zen. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you're kind of helping people in your practice. I mean, what are most of your people coming to you? Have they done any mindfulness practices in the past? Are you teaching them from scratch? How are you helping these people?
Well, many have. One of the things I like to say is that it's all a practice. I just finished a 6 week mindfulness program with a group of high school lacrosse players. This was awesome because you sit down with a group of athletes and you say, well, how do you get better at your free throws? Or how do you increase your bench press? And it's like, well, you got to practice and you got to train and you got to come back and do it over and over again. And so, in many ways, when it comes to some of the practices of mindfulness as well, that's a kind of an easy entry point. So I'll be more specific here. One of the practices that I like to introduce people to is simply noticing their breath.
Hmm.
One of the first things that changes when our state of being changes is the breath. And so one of the things I like to support people with is what I describe as kind of neutralizing, just everyday life. I live in New York City, so
Oh,
everything is stimulating, right?
yeah,
It's everything around in the environment is saying, go, 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 don't
yeah.
stop, more, faster. And so, what I like to do is I like to help support people to really find a practice that works for them, helping support people with overwhelm in the workplace,
Mhm.
helping people to be in better relationship with their body, understanding, this miracle that's always happening and to be able to tune into that as opposed to kind of this disease-centered model that we've used
Mhm.
for many years. I'm a longtime student of biology, and many of the frameworks that I understood the science of biology was through when something goes wrong.
Mhm.
And so, what would it be like to kind of have a wellness centered model where literally just the miracle of taking in a breath and letting out a breath becomes a starting place and enough to, again, tap into the present moment?
I just started doing breath work pretty recently, and I was like, man, this is actually some seriously powerful stuff. It's
What
unbelievable.
what kind have you tried?
Man, I've just following along with an app. So I went to a place called Rhythmia down in Costa Rica. It's a ayahuasca life advancement center, but they teach breath work as well. And they also have a guy named Gino who put a whole bunch of stuff on their app. And I just kind of follow along with it. I just follow along and do what they're telling me to do. But I mean, your whole body is going numb and yeah, like it's
Yeah.
powerful stuff. You start crying, you're like, what the hell's going on? It's amazing what your breath can do, you know? Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
And it's cool to hear that there's kind of that suspension of the label of,
mhm,
what is it called or how do I do it? And like when you get to experiment, you just kind of like, well, how does this feel in my
mhm,
body? And what am I noticing? And I think that's a really, really good start for anyone because, when we start sometimes trying to change things, there's kind of that reaching for a goal versus missing the journey along the
yeah.
way.
Yeah, I just had a friend here who was an army buddy of mine, and he became a respiratory therapist. And so I was telling him, man, you got to try breath work. And he just goes straight to the medical side. Oh, so you're just hyperventilating. And I'm like, no, I promise you, it's more, there's more to it than just that, you know, and there is a lot to it. So how long have you been doing this?
Which aspect of it?
Well, everything it sounds like you tackle a whole bunch of stuff, man.
You know, I like to say that nothing in nature is ever wasted.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of a culmination of many things. I spent 12 years as a classroom teacher teaching biology. And so that was definitely a good starting place in terms of taking a very complex idea and being able to break it down. One of my favorite questions was always like, why are we learning this? Like, who cares?
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
and I would kind of assume the seat of the student, kind of jump to that side of the room and ask myself the question, premature of anyone actually asking it, because I think those things are important to understand what you're learning and why. And so the formal educator in me started in about 2010. That's when I moved to New York City to teach in the Department of Education. I did my yoga teacher certification in 2015. And for many years, I didn't actually teach yoga asana, yoga philosophy, or any of the aspects of yoga because it was more of a practice to help me sustain as a classroom teacher. There were some real dark days, moments where, I could have walked out at lunchtime and that would have been the end of it. And so yoga was really the thing that brought me back and helping me to really find my center before I would come into the classroom, even before I would come into the building. And then that would translate into, being able to reset in between classes. And so I started teaching yoga formally in 2020. And so I've been teaching different mindfulness practices through mindful movement yoga and also leading some retreats as well.
So do you do that online? Or are you doing it in person, or how are you?
I do it mostly in person. So all of my retreats so far have been in person. And I have taught some online classes. Most of what I do online is in the kind of the life coaching, that mindfulness space of really helping to support people over an extended period of time.
Nice. How does the life coach thing work? Because I've had a handful of guys come on, and everybody's kind of got their, coaching program, and I haven't signed up with anybody. And I've thought like maybe this could be for me, but I don't really understand from my side. And maybe if somebody's listening out there, they don't really understand how does a life coach, like what's the benefit of signing up with a life coach, and what is kind of the interaction with you guys? How often does that happen? And
I think there are many variations of how one coaches, right?
Mhm.
Just like when we think about most other professions, whether we think about teachers or most other things, there's some kind of wiggle room. I think one of the most freeing things that I've experienced as a life coach is that I get to really connect with the people who really resonate with where I am when it comes to life coaching. One of the analogies that I like to use is of sports. You think about the team that's on the field, the coach is on the sideline. This is the person that's got the playbook who's saying, "Hey, maybe you should try this play next time, or tighten up your defense, tighten up your offense." Someone that you can be accountable with, yet someone who sees the best in you, who sees a level of potential that maybe you don't always see in yourself. And so when we talk about the field of coaching, it is so vast, because I truly believe that we are ultimately here to be in community and support each other. And so one's expertise may be in finances, and that's what they coach on. One's expertise may be in health and wellness, and that's what they coach on. And so even the amount of time that one spends working with a coach could be very different. I'll speak for myself. I like to initially work with clients from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And in that 3 to 6 months, it really is a framework that helps to take many of the different aspects of mindfulness and to be able to apply it to oneself. My signature method is actually called the Timothy method. And it's an
Right.
acronym.
I like it. It's got a good name. The
It's
Timothy method.
yeah, and so it's an acronym where the T is all about tuning into sensations of the body. So, this is really becoming aware of this physical vessel. How does it feel to be in this body? What are the different circumstances when you walk into a room? Are there changes that you notice, etc.? The I is all about implementing daily habits and routines. They always say we are creatures of habit. And so I like to support people in really kind of looking at habits and also, again, that moment of reflection, seeing which ones are working and which ones may not be working. The M is all about managing stress. This is that kind of gets into the crux of modern living. We live in a time where we're always stimulated, whether it be
Mhm.
through the artificial lights or the sounds or the all the things. There are many levels at which we can start to manage our stress. The O is about optimizing the environment. This includes not just the environment, meaning the place where we find ourselves. This could also include the people that we associate with. The T is training for meaningful breaks. This is ideal for that person who says, I don't have time for mindfulness. I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time for this. And so we start to see, where are those breaks, those moments when you start your car ignition? Do you take off immediately, or do you have time to take 5 breaths just to calm down? Some people, that may be all the space they have.
Mhm.
But when we can start to see those, then we can start to harness, which is the H, harness the energy that's all around us. And then the Y is all about the highest yield on self awareness. So throughout this entire journey, it's really about knowing oneself better.
Man, I'm gonna steal that. I love the Timothy method. That's amazing. I mean, you're pretty much hitting every point there. Do you find a lot of people are when they sign up with you, they're already at the point where they're willing to follow through on some of the guidance that you're giving them? Because I'm basically an unpaid life coach, because I've had so many people come and talk to me and ask for advice. Your clients are obviously people who are willing to change, or do you run up against some obstacles, and how do you overcome them if you do?
Yeah, I think resistance shows up in many forms. Like I said, one of the most common is kind of the misconceptions that exist when it comes to just the word alone. Like, when one says, "Oh, yes, I'm a mindfulness coach," and people are like, "Man, why would I do something like that?" Or "I don't have time to slow down," or I get the whole list of things. And so usually, I'll give you an example with that. When a person tells me that they don't have time to meditate, initially, I don't argue with them. You're telling me that you don't have time. What
Mhm.
I can do, and what I like to do as a coach, is to kind of put on the curiosity hat. So instead of the advice being, "Well, yes, actually you do. You can sit down during this time." I like to get curious about it and say, "Well, if you don't have time to meditate, when do you have time to just sit down and maybe take 3 deep breaths, the deepest breaths that you've taken all day?" You know, that's one of the ways that I look at resistance. I also get people who are willing to change, and at the same time, some who are kind of resistant. It's the practice. And that's what I like to always come back to. With a steady foundation, we can build on top of that. I think even a moment of one's presence and true presence is one to expand awareness and to ultimately be a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself, I know I'm like, I need to do breath work. I need to work out. I need to eat good. Like, I know everything I need to do, and I'll do it for a few days. And then it's just, I'm too busy. I got all this stuff going on. And eventually I come back to it. But the consistency is where I fail. I'm still looking for the answer to how to be consistent. I don't know if that's something you
Yeah.
got.
Well,
But
have you, I'm curious, have you
yeah.
ever used a habit tracker?
No, nope.
That's one for me personally, I would say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Like, I was introduced to a habit tracker, and it was because I had listened to a podcast. I forget who I was listening to, but I listened to a podcast and they were talking about hydration. And they were talking about how just chronically dehydrated, like, basically we all are.
Mm-hmm.
And I got really curious. So I started using a habit tracker to actually keep track of how much water I was drinking per day. Now, when one hears that initially, it's like that's like some nerd shit. Like, it's like, oh, you just use a habit tracker and you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
get going. It's practice. It's not perfection. Just because I used it don't mean that every single day I was like just this diligent at checking
yeah,
off. Yet in that process, I learned something about myself. I learned, oh, well, on the days that I'm super busy, like I see that I didn't have any check marks. I wonder what was happening here. And so I think all of that to say, anything that we want to increase or anything that we want to make better, it's really helpful to actually have a measure of it. And so simply tracking the habit first is a really crucial starting point to developing a new one.
so you drink lots of water now?
Sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes, yeah,
I got, I got mine here, and I
yeah,
definitely don't drink what I'm supposed to. Yeah,
yeah,
not water. But
yeah, and
uh,
and again, it's like that sometimes, right? And it's this how can we learn to also soften the edges around that and give ourselves grace in
mhm.
the moments where, dare I say, we missed the mark, like, oh, I didn't do it today. And it's like, can we be okay with that? Like, can we not be so critical of ourselves and so hard on this, this perfectionist?
Yeah.
Practice makes perfect, they say. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I, like I just said, I mean, I miss the mark all the time, and I eventually come back to it, but it's so easy to go from, well, I ate like crap today, and so, eh, I blew it. And now I take a week off because I blew it one meal. It's like, it doesn't make any sense, And
Mm.
so a habit tracker or a coach, somebody to put me back. Get
Yeah.
me back in check.
And then so like with that example of eating, so you fall off track for a week. Well,
Hmm.
once you get back on track, can you reduce that time? When you fall off the next time, not if, but when you fall off the next time, can instead of it being a week before you come back, can it be 6 days? And then the next time, can it be five? And then can it be four? And then can it be three? And then, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely, I mean, I'm trying to start before the new year. I'm like, I've already cut out all the sugar and all that crap. So I'm ready for the new year. But um, what is epigenetics? That's in your bio, and I've heard the name, but I haven't researched it at all. How does
yeah.
that tie in?
So epigenetics is the field of study that really looks at what is it that is sort of at the control above the genetic level. And so the prefix epi means above and genetics. And it's kind of the shift away from, this particular thing runs in my family. And because it runs in my family, then that means that, I'm going to have it or I'm going to get it. Well, epigenetics, again, kind of shines this other side of the story that says, wait a minute, if this gene is the thing that's controlling whatever the manifestation is, what is it that turns the gene on?
Hmm.
So thinking about like a light switch, the switch may be there, but it's not necessarily turning itself on. We can start to look at when we consider some of the things that are related to epigenetics, then we start to get into some of this metaphysical thing. We start to pay a bit more attention to even the internal environment of the body. So, stress is one of the examples that's most widely used because the experience of stress creates chemistry of stress. And so, if there's the chemistry of stress, then this is going to turn on and activate things that are signaled by, that cascade of events. So,
Hmm.
epigenetics again describes the control of genes above the genetic level.
Hmm. So I'm just going to kind of tie this in a little bit and get kind of your thought on it. I was in the military, served in Iraq. I was in law enforcement for almost 10 years. Brother killed in a car accident, blah, blah, blah. PTSD, extremely bad for almost 20 years. And I went and did ayahuasca back in last December. And literally, it was like a light switch, just shut all that off. And so I'm kind of curious, like, it was obviously an extreme hallucinogenic drug. But they say it kind of rewires your neural pathways and shuts all that stuff off. So is that kind of tied into epigenetics, or are those kind of separate things?
Yeah, it can definitely tie into it because, again, epigenetics, we can even start to talk about things like how thought and emotion are also a part of this cascade that happens above the genetic level. So, yeah, I would say that they're definitely interrelated,
Yeah.
interconnected at some point.
Have you ever heard or tried any of that stuff?
Yeah, I have.
What do you think?
I think the best way that I can describe it is that you meet yourself.
Yes,
You
I would
you
agree with that.
you meet yourself. And
Yeah.
it can be very different, right? Because we are dynamic. You go in there when, I don't know, you're maybe experiencing a particularly creative moment of your life, or it, again, you meet yourself. And
That's
there's
a good
definitely
way to describe it.
there's definitely so much value in the integration period
Mhm.
because, I think it's especially now that it can be accessible to do many of these things. And so it's one thing to kind of have this peak experience because that peak experience is almost like a rocket ship to the top
Oh
of
yeah.
the mountain, you know. You just skip the training, you skip
Skip
the
everything.
other you potentially. This is
Yeah.
not to say that, one does not step into ceremony as prepared as can be, whatever that means. But that rocket ship to the top of the mountain, it's like coming down can be really, really challenging,
Yes.
and that coming down experience is, again, the day to day, the going to work, the, being in relation with a significant other. These things can really, really be impacted. And so integration is crucial.
Yeah. that was kind of my problem. So I did it in December. I've actually been 3 separate times in a year, but my first experience came back just up here, but came home and my wife's like, yeah, you're still an asshole. I'm like, no, I'm healed. And, life continued to happen and there's ebbs and flows. It changed me 100% for the better. But this last time I went, and I'm still in the integration period. I think I've been home for, I don't know, 3 weeks or something like that. So I was just down there doing it. But this time I know what I'm getting myself into, but I want to start incorporating more of the mindfulness and the breath work and yoga and the eating clean and stuff like that. Cause it is a all encompassing approach to life, not just do ayahuasca and then come home and everything's great. Cause that's not how it works.
No, I was just gonna ask you said you would like to incorporate more like mindfulness. What comes
Yeah.
up for you when you say that?
For mindfulness, for me, it's just being present. I'm never present. I'm always thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day or what happened in, a week ago. And I'm never in the moment unless I'm doing a podcast. That's about the only time I can focus on the here and now. But I am thinking about the next question. So,
Mm,
I try to be more, just more in the moment is mindfulness. And just to me, I don't know if that's the proper use of it or how you look at it, but I mean, what is mindfulness to you?
yeah, no, you described it perfectly.
Okay.
To being in the moment. The most common formal definition is to be present with what is without judgment.
Hmm.
Simply stated, it's very easy to say without judgment, but
Yeah.
just drive down the street and as soon
Oh.
as you get caught by a traffic light or
Oh yeah.
you get whatever, like, up judgments here.
Yeah, yeah.
How do I do this?
Yeah, I think I made it, out of my ayahuasca retreat to the airport, and within 10 minutes of being in there, some lady said something to me, and I got kind of upset. My wife's like, "Oh yeah, Mr. Healed guy," I'm like, okay, you got me, but
Well,
she,
but here's the thing, like, how would you know that it worked if there wasn't a lesson when you
hmm
step out, you know?
yeah,
It's like it's almost as if life has to show you an opportunity to actually implement the lesson. I mean, this is what the formal classroom was kind of modeled. But you'd go through all of these homework and class, and because that was leading up to the quiz or the test or the next big project or the final. So life presents us with opportunities to, you know,
yeah. I
patience, here comes traffic.
Oh, buddy, yeah. It never ends. I try to do my best. One thing, so you were raised in Flint, Michigan. Obviously, most people know about Flint and the reputation of bad water. But what's it like being raised in Flint? Besides that, I'm not familiar. And can you kind of touch on how your childhood was and what it was like around
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. It's wild because at 17, I graduated from high school and I went to Howard University for college. So I go to Washington, D.C., and I'm meeting people from all over the world. Every time that I would say that I'm from Flint, I would get one of two reactions. The first one was either like, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
Like, "I'm glad you made it out."
Yeah.
And or the second one was like, "Oh, you're from Flint." Like, "Whoa," like grab your pockets, like push your
Yeah.
rocks down. Like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, you're from Flint, bro."
Yeah.
Neither of these things made sense to me
Yeah.
because my experience growing up here and, I flex some privilege here. I grew up in a two-parent household, very supportive, and many of the friends that I was surrounded with also grew up in two-parent households with, strong religious support in the community. I still say to this day that some of my best friends are from Flint.
Yeah.
So the first time I kind of had a different perspective was when I left for college, and I would get this reaction so many times. Finally, somebody says, "You should watch Michael Moore. You should watch." I think the first one was like Fahrenheit 9/11 or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I sit down to watch this documentary, and like I said, I'm just kind of wet behind the ears. I'm like, I know my experience, and let me see what they're talking about. And so when they would show certain things like this systematic recruitment through the shopping malls and at school, and like I just thought that was normal. One half of my family is military, so
Yeah.
it was nothing out of the norm. Also, most of my close friends were actually going to college. And so it wasn't like I knew a ton of people that were being recruited to the armed services as they were kind of reporting in the film.
Mm,
Yet I can see how that there was kind of some systematic play in there. Um, and then there were other things in there that I saw also that really added a more wide perspective
mhm.
of what people kind of saw, especially as it pertained to the automotive industry. But again, for me growing up, that was my livelihood. Like I lived the life that I did. I had the experiences that I did because of the automotive industry. So those
Yeah.
weren't, negative things by any means.
No.
I grew up an athlete. I grew up playing music. And so that's what my life was like.
It sounds wonderful.
I say so.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, your parents did the right thing and you're thriving. That's amazing. During one of your previous podcasts, watched uh, after COVID, you ended up leaving the education system, and I just want to say I'm very proud of you for taking that step because knew a lot of people who didn't take that step. And if people don't know what we're talking about, feel free to share if you want to. You don't have to, but you didn't just bend over and take it like a lot of people did.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say that I was liberated for I was mandated for liberation.
I love it.
So yeah, you know, everyone's got their call and it's a matter of if and when you answer it.
Yeah.
So less about the reason
Yeah.
versus like this,
The
this is
mandate.
it. This is
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
my family, I mean, I was one of the guys who didn't go along with the the program, but my sister to keep her job and, a couple of them, it's like, oh my gosh, and now looking back on it, it's like I think we made the right choice, and
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
we don't. I hope I don't get demonetized from the $0 I make on this podcast, but for even bringing that up. But no, that shows me what type of a person you are, a person of your own moral, standing, and you stand up for what's right for you, and I appreciate that about you, man. So
Mm. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, closing out 2024.
Mhm.
This year, three things come up for me, three words. I think I'll start with a G. It's interesting. I mean, I was talking about this earlier. Grace, learning how to give oneself grace.
Mhm.
And mind you, as I share these are going to be things that are deeply personal. I wouldn't be able to talk about them if
Yeah,
these weren't embodied.
yeah.
Grace, being able to give oneself grace in the face of all things.
Mhm.
For me, that's been something, especially this year, that has been, like I said, an invitation just to come into better relationship with myself. The other one is grit, because that was required on
Mhm.
so many levels. A depth that I don't know that I would have ever discovered inside of my comfort zone. And so that for me is something that, like I said, I'm currently home in Flint, Michigan, visiting for the holidays. And it's something that has come up for me over and over in the time that I've been here. Just the grit, the resilience, the really getting down with it. Like when you gotta, roll your sleeves up or sometimes take your shirt off, whatever you gotta do,
Mhm.
but you gotta get down with it, the grit. And then the other one is gratitude. Gratitude is I feel like it's a word that we use so often in our culture. And it's becoming more and more just like, oh yeah, be grateful, gratitude. Kind of watered down in some instances, like mindfulness or be mindful or mindful communication, mindful this, mindful that.
Mhm.
Um, but to really embody the spirit of gratitude is magical. And I'm sharing this because in reflection of 2024, it's kind of this catapult for what I'm looking forward to in 2025. It's really like all of those things come together in this like there's just like a certain expectancy, a certain excitement, an openness that I feel going into 2025 that I honestly haven't felt before. And I think some of it is through this desire to live more authentically and intentionally.
Mhm.
And it's like there's almost this feeling, this perfect storm of like it can't go wrong in a way. It's just like, let's do this. And so I'm sharing that because if anyone can, be nurtured by that, find some time to reflect, take those words and allow them to cultivate whatever it is that you've been working on throughout this year and into the year moving forward. Trust that you are exactly where you need to be and one foot in front of the other.
Man, I appreciate those words. That's what I needed to hear tonight,
Ah,
honestly. No, it's amazing. And I'm probably gonna jack the Timothy method. I love it, man. That was
well,
awesome.
you got to experience it first.
I'm gonna go through this podcast and write them all down and go, okay, I need to do all this stuff. I mean, that's very insightful, like I love it.
Yeah.
Man, you're a blessing. I appreciate your spirit and what you're doing for the world, and you're helping people and spreading the good word. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me here this evening. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm active across social platforms on Instagram, Mindfulness with Timothy. I share insights, wisdom, practices pretty much daily. Although for the month of December, I took the entire month off. So I'm really proud
Good
of
for
myself
you.
for that.
Good for you.
um, but also on Facebook, I share wisdom and insights there. LinkedIn, I share things that are more kind of geared towards the corporate space. If you are interested in some ways that mindfulness might support you in the workspace, please do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. And then on top of that, I do teach some classes online. I would say the best way to be in touch with those is through Instagram for the time being. New website loading and will be available the beginning part of 2025.
All right. I will add all those links into the description. And Timothy, I appreciate the time, man. Thank you so
Tim,
much.
I appreciate you as well.
Thank you.